Amid a blinding flood in Montana, a mute boy rides a forsaken horse, charging through raging waters to rescue dozens of stranded elders. No one could hear him until the moment he placed his hand on the horse's chest and whispered for the first time in his life, "Ghost." This isn't a miracle, it's a wake-up call to our buried humanity. Subscribe now to never miss another soul-stirring story from us. The wind in Montana didn't just blow, it scraped. It clawed at windows and whispered beneath floorboards like a voice that had forgotten how to speak. Snow fell sideways across the jagged ridges, thick and blunt as silence itself, covering the old logging roads with a coat of blankness. You couldn't see 5 feet ahead. But the locals didn't need to. They knew the shape of every frozen tree, every bend in the unpaved earth, every howl in the wind that wasn't quite wind. Bozeman lay wrapped in its own hush, blanketed in snow, wrapped tight in the heavy hush of deep winter. There were no colors here, just variations of white and blue and the brown-gray of wood too cold to burn. The mountains hunched around the town, like forgotten gods, shoulders buried in snow. Nothing here screamed. Even the animals had learned how to suffer quietly. In a house near the edge of town, not quite in it, but not far enough to escape the gossip, either lived a boy named Logan. 10 years old, small, barely there, and entirely mute, born without a voice. Not just quiet, but voiceless. His silence wasn't a choice or a condition he'd outgrow. It was the constant presence that hovered between him and everything else. The house belonged to Mabel, his grandmother, a hard woman made of salt and granite and old regrets. Her hair, long ago blonde, now whipped about in silver ropes. Her face bore the wrinkles of a woman who had lived through war and the loss of her only son. She didn't smile. Not because she was cruel, but because she'd forgotten what smiling did for the soul. She didn't talk about it Logan's father. Not to Logan, not to anyone. When pressed rarely, she'd mutter, he drowned before he ever learned how to swim in this world, and leave it at that. She didn't hug Logan. She fed him, clothed him, stitched the holes in his gloves. But there were no lullabies, no warm hands on his forehead, no, "I'm proud of you." Just the cold kind of care, the kind that ensures survival, not affection. At school, Logan was a shadow in the corner. Kids didn't understand him, and what they didn't understand, they mocked. When they'd whisper cruel jokes in the cafeteria about the broken boy, the mute freak, he'd stare at them calm as lake ice. But under that stillness, something inside him cracked a little more each time. There were no fights, no tears, just silence, like the boy had accepted the world's refusal to hear him. His teacher, Mrs. Lindstrom, once tried to give him a voice through sign language. Logan learned it quickly, fluidly, but none of the other children did. So his hands remained still, fingers twitching with unspoken words that had no audience. Most days when school ended, Logan would walk home alone, head-down boots kicking through slush. He didn't go straight home. He'd detour through the old path behind the abandoned train yard, stopping near a rusted metal fence where he'd just stand and look at the horizon. He never stayed long. Just long enough to remind himself that there were no fences that went on forever. At night, the house creaked with the weight of old winters. Mabel would sit by the radio, tuning into static and old jazz records from a box that smelled of cigarette ashes and mothballs. Logan would lie in bed, eyes on the ceiling, hands folded across his chest like a boy preparing for burial. The silence inside the house mirrored the silence in his chest. But one night, something changed. The dream came like fire through ice. It began with a thudding sound, low, distant, rhythmic. Hooves. Not soft like a farm pony, but heavy, ancient, like the beat of a war drum calling from beyond the veil. Then came the heat. Flames, orange and white and blinding, licked the edges of his dream, consuming everything. A circus tent in the distance ablaze. Screams from unseen faces. A figure large, dark, muscular, bucking against a burning post. A horse, wild-eyed, mouth open, screaming not in fear, but in defiance. And there, in the center of the inferno, glowing red, like molten metal, was a saddle. It floated above the flames, suspended by some unseen force. Burnt leather, cracked stirrups, and across the flap of it, etched into the scorched hide, were 2 initials, GR. The image seared itself into Logan's brain. The saddle busted down the middle, one stirrup, half-torn straps flayed and charred. But it didn't fall apart. It floated. It held. Like it still remembered the spine of the creature that once wore it. The fire roared louder, louder than any sound Logan had ever known. And then stillness. The flames vanished. The sound faded. The saddle dropped. And Logan woke up, mouth open, breath caught in his throat, chest heaving like he'd run for miles. His palms were sweating. His sheets were tangled around his legs. He sat there for minutes, staring at the frost on his window. His breath fogged the glass. Beyond it, snow was falling again, soft, steady, endless. He rubbed his hands together, then touched his chest, right over his heart. A noise outside. Not a car. Not the wind. A scraping. Something pulling. Something alive. He moved to the window but saw nothing. Just the long stretch of woods and white and dark sky. But something was out there. Something had been watching him, or waiting. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the snow had buried the tracks, if there had been any. Mabel didn't ask why Logan's eyes were bloodshot at breakfast. She placed a plate of toast and eggs in front of him and went back to her radio, twisting the dial until it hit a station that played nothing but static. Logan didn't eat. Outside, the wind had shifted. Not in speed, but in tone. It didn't scream anymore. It whispered. It called. At school that day, Logan didn't hear the jeers or the snickers. He barely saw the other kids. The dream haunted him. Not just the image, but the feeling that something had been trying to speak to him. And he had understood it not with his ears, but with something else. Something deeper. That afternoon, he didn't take the usual detour. He followed the wind instead. It led him past the train yard, past the old lumber mill, down a narrow path he'd never noticed before. Trees leaned in like they were sharing secrets. Birds didn't sing. No animals stirred. Just snow and breath and the distant creak of something old. And then he saw it. At the bottom of a shallow ravine tangled in roots and wire, half buried in snow, was a shape. At first it looked like a broken statue. Stone. Forgotten. But then it moved. A horse. A real one. Barely breathing. Ribs visible beneath torn skin, one eye swollen shut, but the other open and burning like coal. Not with rage, with sorrow, with recognition. And on its back a saddle. Burnt, torn, faded, but unmistakably real. GR. The same initials. The same dream. The same presence. Logan didn't speak. Couldn't. But he didn't need to. He slid down the embankment snow, filling his boots' lungs, burning with cold. The horse didn't flinch. It watched him. Logan stopped a foot away. The air between them hummed. Not a sound. Not a voice. A pulse. He lifted his hand slowly. Palms open. No fear. Then in one motion he placed his hand over his own chest. Then gently over the horse's. A beat. A breath. A promise. The horse didn't move. It didn't buck or groan or retreat. It simply blinked. And Logan knew. He hadn't just found an animal. He'd found a mirror. A creature made of silence and fire and scars that never fully healed. He would come back tomorrow. With water, with medicine, with anything he could carry. But tonight, he would dream again. And this time, he wouldn't wake up afraid. The air in the ravine was different. It didn't hum like the wind up in town. It didn't carry the scent of chimney smoke or the rust of broken machinery. It was still. Too still. As though this place had been forgotten by time, swallowed by the cold earth, and left to exist in its own frozen silence. Logan's boots slid on the ice-crusted slope as he made his way down each step, more hesitant than the last. He didn't know why he was going there. He couldn't explain how his legs had moved on their own, how the wind had whispered just right in his ears, drawing him back to the same ravine where he'd seen no dreamed something impossible. But now it wasn't a dream. The shape was still there, partially buried under branches and ice. The body slumped awkwardly, as if it had fallen from the sky, and the earth hadn't had the mercy to catch it properly. A rib cage heaved slowly, painfully. Not dead, but dying. It was a horse. Its coat was once dark, maybe black or deep chestnut. But now it was matted with dirt, dried blood, and the frosted kiss of early winter. Its legs were scraped raw hooves, cracked. One ear was torn. Snow had begun to collect on its flank, melting slowly from the heat of its body. Logan froze halfway down the slope. His breath misted in front of him, each exhale sharp like shards of glass. He didn't move closer. Not yet. The horse's eye opened. Not wide, not alarmed. Just enough. Just that slow, haunted blink of something that no longer expected kindness. They stared at each other for a long time. The kind of long that isn't measured in seconds, but in heartbeats. Logan didn't blink. Then he saw it. The saddle. It was still strapped into the horse's back, barely holding together. Its leather was blackened, warped, almost fused to the spine from age and wear, and something more sinister. But there, just above the cinched strap, barely visible in the fractured light that filtered down through the trees, were 2 letters. Grr. He knew them instantly. They didn't surprise him. They didn't confuse him. They confirmed something. Something unspoken, unnamed, but certain. This was no ordinary horse. This was him, the one from the fire, the one from the dream. Logan's fingers twitched at his sides. He didn't carry rope, or food, or blankets. He hadn't expected to find anything real. But he took 1 step forward, then another. The horse didn't move, didn't flinch, only watched. And then slowly, trembling with every ounce of hesitation and instinct he possessed, Logan lifted his right hand. Open palm. No fists, no threats. He touched his chest, not dramatically, not as a gesture, just a gentle press of fingertips to the center of his ribcage right over the heart. His own silent language. Then, ever so gently, he lowered his hand and reached out toward the horse's chest. He stopped inches away. The horse didn't pull back, so he closed the distance, pressed his small cold palm against the warm, wounded hide of the animal's chest. There was no sound, no rustle of leaves, no screech of hawk, no whisper of wind. Just breath, 1 breath then another. The boy and the horse, 1 heartbeat beneath skin, 1 heartbeat beneath fur. And somehow impossibly they aligned. Logan felt it, an almost imperceptible shift. Not in the air, not in the world, but in himself. Like something that had been locked in place for years had suddenly clicked free. A gear that had always jammed, now turning for the first time. He didn't know what to do next, so he just stood there, hand on the horse, eyes locked on that weathered, branded saddle. It was cracked through the middle, 1 stirrup dangling by a thread, the girth strap hanging loose and frayed like an unraveling secret. But it hadn't fallen off. It stayed. Even broken, it stayed. Logan's breath caught in his throat. He knelt down beside the horse, not quickly but slowly, like one does at a grave. His knees touched the frozen ground. His fingertips brushed across the saddle's scarred surface. He ran them over the letters. Chiar, ghostwriter. The name lived in the town's whispers, the old wives' tales, the fading newspaper clippings tucked in the back of forgotten drawers. A circus horse. A phantom. An accident no one spoke about anymore. But now he was here, broken, still breathing, still waiting. Logan sat beside him, not knowing how long. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time in the ravine had no shape. He watched the steam rise from the horse's nostrils, watched the way his sides rose and fell with uneven rhythm. There were wounds on his legs, on his shoulders, dried blood near his flank. No fresh ones, but no healing either. Whoever had owned him last had left him here, left him to die. The thought stirred something hot inside Logan. Not anger. Not yet. Just a kind of low, dull ache. A recognition. He knew what it felt like to be left behind. To be looked at like a burden, like something inconvenient, something silent. He reached out again, this time to the horse's face. His hand hovered near the jaw, inches from the cracked halter that had once been red and was now stained brown and black. He didn't touch, not yet. Just let the warmth of his skin meet the trembling heat of the horse's breath. The horse blinked again, then for the first time leaned ever so slightly forward. Their foreheads didn't touch, but they could have. Logan stood slowly. His legs were stiff, his hands shook. He looked at the sky gray, not quite snowing. Still time. He'd have to go. He couldn't stay here tonight. The horse wouldn't last many more. Logan turned and scrambled back up the slope, slipping twice, clawing at frozen branches, hands raw. At the top, he turned around. The horse hadn't moved, just lay there, eyes half-lidded like a ghost, already fading. But Logan had seen something else. Not death. Not yet. He ran home. As fast as his lungs would carry him. As fast as his feet could cut through snow and memory. He ran past the school, past the gas station, past the rusted Jesus Saves sign that swung in the wind and squeaked like a dying hinge. He didn't stop until he reached the shed behind his house. The one Mabel never touched anymore. Inside, he found an old wool blanket, a tin bucket, a bag of oats that had expired 2 years ago. He grabbed it all. He found a cracked thermos and filled it with hot water from the tap. Not ideal, not clean, but warm. He found a roll of gauze from the bathroom cabinet, a jar of Vicks. It would burn, but it was all he had. He didn't tell Mabel, didn't leave a note. He just left, back through the woods, back down the slope, back to the ravine. The horse was still there. Logan approached slowly, sat beside him, poured the warm water into the bucket, dipped the gauze in, and began to clean the wounds. The horse twitched once, a reflex, but didn't resist. When he was done, Logan laid the blanket across the horse's back. It was too small, but it was something. Then he sat beside him again, pulled his knees to his chest, closed his eyes. The wind above whistled like an old hymn, but down in the ravine there was only breathing. Two creatures who had known silence too long. Their breath rose in perfect rhythm, the same, each inhale, each exhale, like a song with no melody, like a lullaby made only of presence. And in that moment, the world outside, the cruel laughter, the empty house, the endless winter ceased to matter. There was only this, a boy who couldn't speak, a horse who wouldn't run, and a broken saddle that still held the memory of glory. The night fell slow, and neither of them was alone anymore. The days that followed were quieter than usual, not because the wind had stopped shrieking through the trees of Bozeman, not because the snow had ceased falling in heavy sheets across the rooftops, not because the world outside had grown more merciful, but because something had begun, something that didn't rely on sound, something that grew in silence, nurtured not by words, but by presence. Every morning before the sun had even considered rising, Logan would slip out of the house. He'd wrap his scarf twice around his neck, careful not to wake Mabel, whose snores vibrated through the paper-thin walls of the old farmhouse. In his backpack, an old thermos filled with warm water, a jar of petroleum jelly mixed with pine sap he'd read about in an ancient survival book, a bruised apple, and 2 slices of dry bread wrapped in wax paper. Sometimes he added half a carrot from the cellar when Mabel wasn't watching. He didn't take anything for himself, not even a word. The hike to the ravine took 40 minutes on a good day, longer in heavy snow. Logan knew every crack in the trail now, every branch that threatened to snag his coat, every sound that wasn't natural. He moved like a shadow, soft, deliberate, mostly invisible. When he reached the edge of the slope, he always stopped, not for breath, for reverence. Down there, half hidden beneath the drifts and thorny scrub, was Ghost Rider. And though Logan still didn't know if that was truly the horse's name, or even if he belonged to the old circus dream, it didn't matter. In Logan's world, that name was carved in stone. Each morning, Logan would descend slowly, his boots careful not to kick too much snow loose, his gloves pressed tightly against the supplies in his bag so nothing rattled. By now, the horse recognized the sound of his approach. Or maybe it was his scent. Or maybe Logan liked to imagine it was something else, something unspoken between them. There was no greeting, no whinny, no stomp, just that same dark eye, turning to meet his, not with fear, not anymore, with something closer to recognition. Trust, maybe. Logan would kneel beside him and begin the quiet ritual. He would start with the water, pouring it slowly into the rusted tin bowl he'd brought days before. The horse would drink slowly, carefully, as though the act of taking was something he hadn't been allowed to do for a long time. Then came the food. Logan would press the apple into the soft, chapped lips, watching as teeth broke through fruit. The bread would follow. The carrot, when there was one, disappeared almost instantly. Logan didn't smile. He only watched, eyes wide, almost afraid to blink. Then came the healing. Logan would open the jar of ointment and dip his fingers in the mixture, cool and sticky. He'd rub it gently onto the torn patches along the horse's legs, the cracked skin behind the ears, the raw patches where the saddle had bitten too deeply. Sometimes the horse flinched, but he never moved away, not once. And after everything was done, after the food, the water, the care, Logan would sit back on his heels and wait. Just wait. The two of them would share a silence thicker than snowfall, the kind that felt like a language all its own. Logan didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Each movement was a sentence, each glance a paragraph. His fingers spoke in rhythm, the way they would reach forward, pause, retreat, then gently rest on the horse's withers. His breath timed itself to the horse's rising chest, trying to sink. There were no words, but there was communication. Not even the most gifted linguist could have translated it. But it was there. He repeated one gesture every time, without fail. Hand to chest, hand to horse. It had begun that first day, instinctual. Now it was sacred. He'd place his palm flat against his heart, feel it thudding there like a caged bird, and then gently extend his hand to press against the same place on Ghost's chest. Just for a second. Just enough. It was their heartbeat handshake. Each day, Logan stayed a little longer. Each day, the horse seemed a little more present. On the third morning, something changed. After Logan had finished the ritual, after he'd sat back on his heels with numb fingers and stiff knees, he saw it. The horse's ear twitched, not toward a sound, toward him. Just the left ear, slow, unsure, but deliberate. It rotated slightly like a dish, adjusting to catch a frequency. Logan didn't move. The horse blinked again, and this time slowly, almost imperceptibly lifted his head. Only an inch, maybe less. But Logan saw it. Something stirred inside his chest. He didn't have a word for it. But if he had, it might have been hope. On the fifth day, Logan brought a tattered scarf from his room, the one his father had worn in the last photograph Logan owned. The color had faded from blue to ash gray, and the fringe was coming loose. He laid it gently across the horse's neck after applying the balm. The horse didn't flinch. He let it stay. On the seventh day, Ghost shifted his weight, only slightly, but it sent a crack through Logan's frozen resolve. A miracle had happened in that motion, a declaration of life, of intent. The world might have missed it. But Logan saw. He began keeping a small journal, stolen pages from Mabel's recipe book. He didn't write words. He drew shapes. The curve of a neck, the twist of a torn ear, the outline of ribs that had begun to fill back in little by little. And always in the bottom corner of the page, the same two shapes. A hand on a chest, a hand on fur. It was their language. No teacher had taught it. No one had heard it. But it was loud in Logan's chest. On the 9th day, Logan arrived to find Ghost's head lifted before he even reached the bottom of the ravine. The horse was waiting. That night, Logan slept for the first time in what felt like years without clenching his fists. His dreams were still full of fire, but this time, the flames parted. And Ghost stood in the center, not afraid but proud. The next morning it happened. Logan had just finished brushing snow from the makeshift blanket, just laid out the bread and water, when he turned to retrieve the jar of ointment and heard it. A scrape, a crunch. He turned. Ghost was standing, all four legs shaky but grounded, his neck arched low, his knees bent awkwardly. But he was upright. His ribs expanded fully for the first time. And then he took a step. Logan froze. He didn't cheer. He didn't gasp. He didn't even blink. He just watched. The horse took another step, then stumbled. The front leg buckled and he dropped to one knee. But it didn't matter. He had stood. He had moved. The world had shifted. Logan crawled forward on his knees, eyes wide, heart racing like a freight train. He didn't touch Ghost. He didn't rush to help. He just did what he always did, pressed his hand to his own chest, pressed it again to Ghost's. Their breaths met in the cold between them. 2 exhalations, 1 rhythm. And in that moment, Logan felt something unfurl inside him. Not a voice. Not yet. But something close. A vibration beneath the silence. A pressure rising. And when he looked into Ghost's eyes, he saw it reflected back. A boy and a horse, both broken in places no one could see now. Healing not through sound, but through something older. Something purer. Recognition. Connection. Love. They stayed that way until the sun melted the edge of the snowdrifts and the frost began to crack along the roots. And in that breath, between night and day, Logan knew this was only the beginning. The library in Bozeman sat like a weary cathedral at the edge of town, surrounded by iron-limbed trees and the ghosts of long winters. It smelled of paper ink and quiet, a kind of forgotten silence that matched Logan's own. It wasn't large, just 3 rooms and a basement archive. But it held more than books. It held memory. Logan hadn't been there in over a year. Not since Mrs. Lindstrom's field trip, when the other kids had laughed at him for signing thank you to the librarian. But today something pulled him back. The saddle haunted him. Each night he lay awake, the initials burned into his eyelids. G.R. Ghost Rider. The name had started as a whisper, then grew teeth. He needed to know, not out of curiosity, out of something deeper, duty maybe, or fear, because he could feel it. That horse wasn't just an animal. He was a story no one had finished. Inside the library was warm, but dust-heavy. Logan kept his head low as he passed the front desk, nodding politely to the gray-haired woman who glanced up from her knitting. He went straight to the old file room, past the microfilm reels, past the local history clippings, to the drawer labeled Traveling Performances 1900 Present. His fingers worked methodically, eyes scanning headlines, black and white photos, flyers half-eaten by time. Rodeos, vaudeville, county fairs. Then, Black Ridge Traveling Circus. 1 night only, August 2015. The poster was yellowed. The ink faded to a tired rust. A red and gold tent in the background. A man in a top hat. And in the foreground, a black stallion mid-leap through a ring of fire. The fearless flame jumper, Ghost Rider. Logan's breath hitched. It was him. He pressed the image closer to his face. No saddle visible. But the eyes, the tilt of the ears, even the scar on the front leg. It was him. He needed more. He flipped the flyer over, but the back was blank. No clue where the circus had gone. Just a date. August 14th, 2015. 7 years ago. A headline caught his eye, half stuck between pages. Inferno. Engulfs Black Ridge tent. 2 injured, multiple animals lost. He pulled the article from the drawer, hands trembling. A grainy photograph showed the remains of a tent reduced to ash and twisted metal. The article mentioned faulty wiring. A sudden spark during the fire jumping act. A trainer hospitalized. A lion escaped. Several animals presumed dead. One lion buried near the bottom punched through his chest like a nail. The fate of Ghost Rider, the black stallion known for his fire-leaping act, remains unknown. Logan sat back the papers shaking in his lap. He didn't imagine it. He was real. But why had no one looked for him? Why had no one come? A shadow passed across the light above him. Someone had entered the archive room. Logan turned. A tall, wiry man with snow-colored hair and a sun-leathered face stood by the door. He wore an old army coat, one button missing. His hands shook slightly, but his eyes were sharp, frantic like wind against barbed wire. "You don't want to dig into that?" The man said, voice low and hoarse, like it had been dragged across gravel. Logan froze. The man pointed to the papers in Logan's lap. The fire. The horse. Ghost Rider. "You don't want that story." Logan met his gaze, heart thudding. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out the Polaroid he'd taken 2 days before, a blurry, snow-drenched photo of Ghost lying in the ravine. The man's breath left his body in a rush. "Jesus," he whispered. Then louder. "That can't be. He was gone. I saw him fall." He stumbled backward, bracing himself against the wall, like the past had just punched him in the stomach. Logan stood. He didn't speak. He held the photo forward. "Where did you get this?" the man rasped. "Where is he?" Logan hesitated, then slowly pointed toward the trees beyond the library window. The man's jaw tightened. He looked around the room, then down at his boots, and finally said, "Come with me." The shack stood behind the old feed mill, where no one went anymore. Reed unlocked the door with fingers that trembled more from memory than cold. Inside was a cluttered mess of scrap metal horse tack, rusted lanterns, and a stack of black suitcases that looked untouched since the Eisenhower administration. He pointed to a wooden trunk. "Everything I have is in there." Logan knelt beside it, opened the latch. Inside, photographs, charred bits of costume, a piece of scorched velvet, and a saddle strap. Reed knelt beside him. "I wasn't supposed to stay with the circus?" he said, voice quieter now, more measured. "I was just the groundskeeper. Kept the trucks fueled, fed the animals when the regulars drank too much." He picked up a photo Ghost mid-leap, flames curling beneath his hooves. "But he liked me. That horse. Most didn't. He'd flatten his ears when people got too close. Snap at anyone with a whip." He paused. "Except her." Reed reached into the bottom of the trunk and pulled out a picture faded bent at the corners. A girl, maybe 16. Freckles braids a crooked smile. Standing beside Ghost, her hands cupping his face like they shared a secret. Her name was Clara, the trainer's daughter. She taught him to leap not for food, not for applause, but for fun. He didn't perform tricks. He danced. Reed's voice caught. When the act grew popular, the ringmaster added fire hoops. Said it drew crowds. Clara fought him. But money speaks louder than horse sense. He sat back, hands on his knees. That night, the rigging caught. One hoop collapsed mid-jump. Ghost caught fire on his flank. Panicked. Clara tried to get to him. Reed stared at the floor like it had swallowed her whole. She died 2 weeks later. Smoke inhalation. Infection. Logan closed his eyes. The photo of the girl trembled in his hands. Reed's fingers curled into fists. After that, Ghost wouldn't let anyone near him. Bit the new handlers. Kicked a vendor. They caged him. Talked about putting him down. A silence spread. Then almost too softly to hear, Reed said, "I let him out." Logan looked up. Reed nodded slowly. Midnight. The night before the circus packed up. I opened the trailer gate. Said, "Run." His voice broke. I didn't think he'd survive. He was limping. Burned. But he looked at me, straight into me, and I knew. He understood. He knew I wasn't like the others. Logan's chest tightened. He pressed his hand there. Reed saw. Smiled just a little. "I know. You get it, don't you? He wasn't just a horse. He felt everything. And it hurt." The man stood pacing now, agitated. "I told people. No one listened. They called me cracked. Said I let out a wild animal. They didn't care about him. Just the loss in ticket sales." He looked at Logan, eyes suddenly clear. "They never found him." Logan shook his head. Reed collapsed into a chair. 7 years, he whispered, "and he's alive." Logan nodded again, then lifted the Polaroid. Reed studied it like scripture. Then softly, like the words had waited years to surface, he said, "He didn't run because of the fire." He looked up. He didn't run because he was afraid. He leaned forward. He ran because the world forgot how to be kind. Logan's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. He just pressed his hand to his chest. And for the first time, someone mirrored him. Reed's hand followed slow, unsure, and landed over his own heart. 2 hands, 2 wounds, 2 understandings. "I'll help," Reed said finally. "Whatever he needs. Whatever you need." They sat in silence. No words, only breath. And in that breath, a pact was made. The past would no longer be a fire. It would be a torch. The wind that morning had teeth. It tore through the gaps in the old farmhouse's walls, slipping under doors and gnawing at the floorboards, like some half-starved creature. The sun hadn't yet cracked the horizon, but but Logan was already moving. Quiet. Careful. He zipped his coat and slung the satchel over his shoulder, the thermos of hot water clinking against a jar of balm. The food was simple today, half a sweet potato wrapped in wax paper and 2 crushed crackers. Enough. Just enough. He reached for the door latch with the delicacy of a thief. The hallway creaked behind him. He froze. Where do you think you're going? Mabel's voice, low and graveled from years of cigarettes and holding in grief, stopped him like a blade against the spine. Logan didn't turn. She stepped forward. Her shadow fell long across the floor, framed by the flicker of the wood stove. Her arms were crossed, but not in anger tension. Suspicion. The kind that's earned from losing too much and trusting too little. You think I don't notice? She said. Sneaking out before dawn. Coming back soaked in snow. Bruises on your knees. What is it? Where do you go? Logan's grip tightened on the strap. She took a step closer. I'm talking to you, Logan. He turned halfway, eyes wide, unblinking. Say something, her face begged. Use your hands. Write it down. Anything. But he didn't move. Didn't sign. His silence, once forgivable, now felt like defiance. Her jaw clenched. You don't get to disappear on me. Still, he said nothing. The kettle on the stove began to shriek. Without breaking eye contact, Mabel walked to it, lifted it from the burner, and slammed it down on the counter. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. Logan flinched. She grabbed a bowl from the drying rack, hands shaking, and dropped it into the sink. Then, with a sharp jerk, she threw it. It shattered against the wall. Ceramic sprayed across the floor like white shrapnel. Logan didn't cry, didn't scream. He sat down at the table, face pale, and slowly, almost too slowly, bowed his head forward until it rested against the scarred wood. Stillness, except for the sound of her breath. Shallow, ragged, a war between fury and terror. Don't you dare shut down on me, she hissed. Don't you! She cut herself off. Silence poured in between them, heavy as concrete. Finally, she spoke again, quieter. You're not your father. You don't get to run off and disappear. The words hung there, venomous. Logan lifted his head. His hands moved jerky sudden. He signed something sharp, his fingers slicing the air. I'm not him. She squinted. What did you say? He repeated it slower. I'm not him. It struck her like a slap. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then she spoke, barely audible. You're not. But you're starting to break me the same way. She turned back, and when she did, her eyes were red-rimmed. You don't just get to go and love something else. Not while I'm still picking up the pieces. She pointed to the door. From now on, you stay inside. Do you hear me? Logan didn't move. I mean it. No more sneaking out. I don't care what you're hiding. She stepped forward, reached for the strap over his shoulder. He jerked back. For a moment, they stood locked in a standoff. A boy made of silence. A woman made of scars. Then he bolted. Through the back door, down the steps into the storm. Logan, but the wind swallowed her voice. The snow had thickened. The ravine was almost invisible beneath it. By the time Logan reached Ghost, his lungs burned and his gloves were soaked through. His face stung with cold, but the sight before him chilled him deeper. Ghost was curled into himself, legs tucked awkwardly under his body. Frost clung to the edges of his nostrils. His eyes were only half open. He was losing the fight. Logan dropped to his knees, shoved the blanket from his pack across the horse's back. Useless. It was already damp. The warmth wouldn't last. The temperature was falling fast, too fast. Logan did the only thing he could think to do. He curled up beside him, pressed his chest against Ghost's ribcage, wrapped one arm over the curve of the neck, and lay there. The snow kept falling. There were no stars, no wind. Just the hush of cold trying to erase everything. He pressed his hand against his chest, then against Ghost's. No rhythm, just tremors. He closed his eyes and waited. Morning came in gray, a bruised sort of light. Mabel had been awake all night, pacing the floor, staring at the back door, like it might open on its own. Her heart raged in her chest, a chaotic drum she hadn't felt since the telegram came about her son. She had screamed into pillows. She had thrown another cup, but none of it mattered now. She grabbed her coat, pulled on boots over bare feet, and stepped into the snow. She didn't know where she was going, but her body did. She followed the faintest impressions. Broken twigs, a dropped scarf, a disturbed drift. Her breath came in panicked bursts. Halfway through the woods, she found a broken thermos. Then a strip of red cloth she remembered sewing onto Logan's coat when he was 6. Then she heard nothing, saw nothing, but felt it, a stillness. She descended the slope faster than her knees could carry her, and then she saw them. Logan, Ghost, curled together under a blanket of snow. Boy's arm draped over the horse, like a child clutching a stuffed toy. She screamed his name. The wind didn't take it this time. She stumbled down, fell once, then scrambled to her feet. Collapsed beside him. His lips were blue, his fingers curled tight. She yanked off her gloves and touched his face. It was cold, Too cold. Logan, she choked. Please, Logan. No answer. She looked down at his hands. The snow around them was red. Blood. Frozen. She screamed again. Not his name this time. Just a sound. Raw. Animal. Grief and guilt and terror wound into one primal howl. It echoed through the ravine, bounced off the trees, and disappeared into sky. Then movement. Logan's fingers twitched. She gasped. He coughed. Once. Then twice. His eyes fluttered open. Not wide, just enough. Mabel, he mouthed. She sobbed. Pulled him into her arms. Held him for the first time since he was a baby. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here. Ghost stirred beside them. Lifted his head. Looked at her. Not with fear, but with something else. Forgiveness, maybe. Recognition. She met his gaze. And for the first time, she saw it. Not a horse, not a problem, but a soul. She reached out, placed her hand against his chest. Then hesitating, pressed it to her own. The gesture was awkward, unfamiliar, but Logan saw and smiled. Just a little. And in that frozen morning light, surrounded by snow and silence, something old between them broke, and something new began to breathe. The sky above Bozeman turned the color of a bruise. What started as light snowfall had thickened into something more sinister. Slush fell in heavy wet clumps, soaking the earth instead of powdering it. Wind came next. Not sharp and icy like winter usually brought, but warm, humid wrong. In the farmhouse, Logan sat on the floor beside the wood stove, wrapping a fresh strip of cloth around Ghost's foreleg. The radio crackled behind him. Mabel had turned it on out of habit, tuning it to the local station like she always did before dinner. The announcer's voice, usually slow and easy, like old bourbon, now carried tension. Heavy rainfall across the mountains. Flash flood warning in effect for southern Gallatin County. Trappers Hollow and Pine Rock, especially vulnerable. Elder Pines Retirement Center has been advised to relocate residents uphill to the church on Summit Ridge. Logan's hands froze mid-rap. He turned toward the sound, heart thudding. Trappers Hollow. That was less than 2 miles from the ravine. He stood, blood draining from his face. Mabel looked up. What is it? He didn't answer. He grabbed his coat. Logan, he bolted. Outside, Ghost was already saddled. Reed, who had started visiting daily with feed and supplies, stood brushing his mane. He saw Logan running and instinctively stepped aside. Logan pulled himself onto Ghost's back in one swift, desperate movement. No words, no explanation. Just a gesture, palm to chest, then out toward the mountains. Reed didn't need to ask. The storm had already begun. The route to Elder Pines was half flooded. What had been a dirt path was now a narrow thread of mud, cutting through water, rising inch by inch. Logan urged Ghost forward. They moved like shadows through the trees. Rain slashing at their faces, thunder snarling above. Branches whipped past. Rocks slid underhoof. Twice Ghost nearly fell. But each time he pushed harder. The boy on his back was no longer afraid. He had something to do. By the time they reached the edge of the hollow, the stream near the retirement center had overrun its banks. Water surged over the road, sweeping away trash bins and benches. The wooden bridge that connected the main center to the upper trail creaked under the pressure. Lights flickered in the windows of the retirement home. Panic. Logan leapt from Ghost's back and pounded on the front doors. No one came. He shoved them open himself. Inside, chaos. Nurses yelling, old men shouting for missing pills. One woman in a wheelchair sobbing into her hands. The staff was overwhelmed, underprepared. A nurse spun toward him. You can't be in here. He pointed to the rising water. He signed move. Now. Flood. She blinked, confused. What are you trying to say? He pointed again. Flood. Church. Now. She shook her head, half panicked. We've called for help. They said maybe an hour. He grabbed a dry erase board from the wall, scrawled with shaking hands. Church on hill. I can get them out. She stared. Then behind her, one of the elderly men, tall, thin skin like wrinkled parchment, stepped forward. That's Mabel's boy, he said softly. The quiet one. The nurse hesitated. The water reached the doorway. Logan dropped the marker, ran outside, mounted Ghost again. The old man followed him, grabbing a blanket and draping it over his shoulders. Logan reached down and helped him climb up. They were unsteady, slipping, but they held, and together they rode. The route to Summit Ridge wasn't safe. The main road had caved in where the culvert overflowed. Logan turned Ghost into the woods toward the old horse trail that hadn't been used in years. It was narrow, sloped, dangerous in dry weather, deadly in this. But he trusted Ghost, and Ghost trusted him. They climbed. Behind them, the retirement center began to darken power lines, down transformers shorted. But already, Logan was turning back. He reached the building again just as the nurse had loaded 3 more into a golf cart that wouldn't start. He helped them one by one, an old woman with tremors, a man with oxygen tubes, a couple who clung to each other like children. Each time he carried them to the church. Each time he returned. He made 6 trips. Rain blurred his vision. Mud swallowed his boots. But he never stopped. And Ghost's torn, hoof-healing muscles kept going. No reins, no whip, only belief, only connection. By the time the last group made it to the chapel on the ridge, water had swallowed the parking lot. The retirement center was half submerged. Inside the church, people huddled with blankets and candles. Some prayed, some cried, some just sat in silence. And then someone pointed out the window, a boy on horseback, soaked to the bone, barefoot now, one glove, missing eyes, hollow with exhaustion. He rode into the clearing and stopped, and for a moment, just one, they all stood. Even the infirm, even the blind, they stood and watched. Mabel arrived last. She burst into the chapel, hair wild, breath shallow. She saw him, ran toward him, wrapped him in her arms. He didn't resist. He leaned in. For once, she didn't need him to speak. He didn't need to explain. Around them, the storm still raged. But inside, silence and awe. He had no voice. But he had led them all. Through rain, through chaos, through fear. And the people of Bozeman, the ones who called him broken, who saw his silence as weakness, said nothing. They just watched him, watched the boy and his horse, the ones who saved them all, without ever needing to say a word. The storm had passed. What remained was not quiet, but a kind of hollow resonance, like the world was still vibrating with the memory of what it had just endured. The church on Summit Ridge stood against the bruised morning sky, its wooden beams soaked but unbroken. Inside, the townspeople moved like survivors of a shipwreck, slow, reverent, not yet believing they were still alive. Blankets were passed hand to hand. Elderly men murmured prayers. One woman wept silently beside a candle, but no one spoke of the boy. Not yet. Not out loud. Outside, at the foot of the chapel steps, Logan knelt in the mud. His coat hung heavy from his shoulders, weighed down by water and blood. His lips were cracked, his fingers swollen and scraped. But none of that mattered, because Ghost had collapsed. He lay sprawled on his side in the churchyard, breath, shallow eyes half-lidded, his flanks rising and falling like waves on the verge of retreating. The effort of saving dozens had taken its toll. Ghost had given everything. More than a horse should have been able to give. And now he was still. Not dead, but close. Logan pressed his palms against the coarse black hide. One hand on the neck, the other over the chest, where the heartbeat once thudded with fire. The connection always, their language was faint now. His body shook, but not from cold. It was something else. A tremble of grief, of rage, of helplessness. People had begun to gather behind him. Quiet footsteps over wet earth. Whispers hushed by awe. Even the oldest residents, carried on stretchers only hours ago, stood at the threshold of the chapel, drawn by the silence. They watched the boy kneeling beside the dying horse. They watched the way he didn't cry, how he didn't shout or wail, how he simply stayed, his head bowed, his fingers trembling. Mabel stood nearest, hands pressed over her mouth, shoulders shaking. The wind lifted her coat. Her boots were soaked through. But she didn't move. Reed stood just behind her, eyes locked on Ghost, his own memories flashing like lightning behind tired eyes. No one said a word. The only sound was the wind moving through the pines and the faint, arrhythmic breath of the black stallion who had outrun fire once and fled again. Logan leaned closer, rested his forehead against the horse's side, closed his eyes, and breathed. Then slowly, reverently, he lifted one hand, laid it flat against his own chest, then pressed it against Ghost's. He did it once, twice, and then again. A rhythm, a call, and then a sound, soft, scraped raw from somewhere deep. A single syllable, like a whisper that had waited years to be born. Ghost? The name fell from Logan's lips like a secret breaking free. The sound wasn't perfect. His voice was cracked, dusty from disuse. It barely rose above the wind. But it existed, and that was enough. Everyone heard it. A woman gasped. Someone dropped a cane. Reed's jaw went slack. Mabel's knees gave way, and she caught herself against the chapel rail, her eyes wide, overflowing. The boy who hadn't spoken a word since birth had called his horse by name, and it echoed, not through volume, but through meaning. Ghost? The syllable hung in the air. Ghost's ears twitched, one then the other. Logan didn't move. He said it again, this time firmer. Ghost. The horse's breath caught, then released. Logan pressed his hand tighter against the ribcage. Ghost. The crowd stood frozen. Not one dared speak. It was as if the world itself had been stunned still by the sound of that fragile voice. The impossible voice. Logan leaned in, nose brushing the thick mane, his lips barely an inch from the stallion's ear. Ghost. And Ghost moved. Just a flicker, but undeniable. One hoof shifted in the mud. His eye opened only halfway, but enough. Logan smiled, lips trembling. Behind him, Mabel wept. But not the cold tears of grief she had grown accustomed to. These were something different. Hot, alive. She stepped forward. Not rushed, but steady. Her boots sank into the mud beside Logan. She crouched beside him, placed one hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up. Didn't flinch, she whispered. You called him. He nodded. A small movement, but powerful. She smiled through the tears, her throat tight. You called him. He turned toward her, eyes full, face flushed. Then another miracle. He reached up, fingers shaky, and signed thank you. She didn't know the sign, but she felt it, understood it. She pulled him into her arms, pressing her forehead against his wet hair. And for a long moment, they stayed like that. Boy, woman, horse. A trinity of pain, redemption, and hope. Behind them, the people of Bozeman stood still, not in fear or confusion, but in reverence, because some things didn't need explaining. Some miracles spoke for themselves. Logan pulled back, looked once more at Ghost. He whispered again, "Ghost." And this time Ghost rose, not fully, but to his knees, and the crowd gasped again. It was not just the horse that had returned. It was the boy, the one they thought was broken, mute, invisible. Now he stood not as a whisper, but a roar. A quiet roar, yes, but thunderous all the same. The sun returned like an apology, low-hanging golden, barely warm enough to melt the ice that still gripped the pines. But Bozeman, now dry and upright, buzzed with a tension colder than any flood had delivered. Ghost, his ribs still showing beneath his black coat, was tethered under the awning behind the church. A patch of hay had been laid beneath him, and someone, likely Mabel, had laid an old army blanket across his back to shield him from the wind. Logan sat cross-legged nearby, one hand resting lightly against Ghost's foreleg, the other sketching slow circles into the dirt with a stick. The boy had not spoken again since that morning, but the town had, and not all of it had been kind. The first sign came quietly, a knock on the chapel's door, followed by another, then by voices outside. Insistent, stern, Logan stood as the side door creaked open. Reed poked his head inside. His jaw was tight. "You might want to stay in here, kid," he said, voice gravel. "They've brought their pitchforks." The town hall was never meant to host public outrage, but that afternoon, the modest building overflowed with murmurs and rising tones. A handwritten petition sat on the folding table near the podium, already dotted with signatures. Over it, a crude message: "Remove the dangerous horse, for our safety, for the child's." Mayor Jennings stood to the side, flipping through papers as if they'd form a backbone. At the front of the room, a man in a puffy orange parka raised his voice. "You're all ignoring the facts. That horse is wild. It shouldn't be anywhere near our kids, our schools, hell, our homes." Someone nodded. Another chimed in. "Wasn't that the same one from that circus fire? Killed a girl, didn't it? Attacked his trainer. And that kid, Logan, he can't even tell us what happened. He doesn't talk." "How do we know it's safe?" Mabel sat at the back of the room, arms crossed, lips bloodless. Logan was beside her shoulders, tight eyes staring forward, not blinking. He wasn't scared. He was listening, but not the way they thought. He was reading. Every motion, every shrug, every sneer. "Let's be real," a woman in a green vest said. "The horse is a liability. We barely have animal control out here. If that thing snaps again, who'll be responsible?" Silence followed, until the side door opened. Dana. She moved through the crowd like a storm in still water, dark hair braided down her back, leather boots scuffed from use, jacket stitched with patches from rescues past. A stethoscope dangled from her collar, and her eyes cut through the crowd like truth itself. Dana White Elk, veterinarian and protector of the forgotten. She didn't go to the front. She didn't need to. She spoke where she stood. "I know that horse." The room turned. Some recognized her, others stiffened. She continued, "I treated him 2 days ago. Lacerations, inflammation from old wounds, scar tissue that tells a very different story from the one you're peddling." Dana the mayor tried to interrupt. She raised a hand. "I'm not done." She walked slowly, deliberately, until she reached the petition table, picked up the paper, looked at it, then looked at the room. "Do any of you even know what a circus training whip looks like?" No one answered. She turned the paper over and began to draw. 3 lines, a circle, then a loop with jagged edges. This is what they used on Ghost Rider. It's called a bullhook. Metal-tipped, hidden in cloth, looks like encouragement. Feels like hell. She let the paper fall to the floor. In the months before the fire, Ghost was beaten daily, starved to make him jump faster, punished for flinching. And when he bit back, when he kicked one of them, trying to strap fire to his legs, she looked around the room. He wasn't dangerous. He was screaming. A man in the back raised a hand timidly. "But didn't he kill someone?" Dana's jaw tightened. She died from smoke inhalation. Clara James, 16. The only person who ever treated Ghost with love. She died trying to save him. And the people responsible let the horse take the fall. Silence. She turned toward Logan now. "And you know who heard him when no one else did." The boy's head lifted. She pointed to him. "He did. The kid who you say can't speak. The one who listens better than any of us. He didn't just see a broken horse. He saw someone left behind. Someone like him." Murmurs began again. But they were different now. Uneasy, unsure. Dana stepped closer to the podium. "Ghost didn't fail. We did. We failed to protect him, then blamed him for surviving." She paused, then spoke softer. "This horse isn't a monster. He's a mirror." The room went still. Dana turned to Logan, then to Mabel. "I'll take full responsibility for Ghost. Medical, legal, behavioral. If anyone wants to argue that, they can do it in writing. But I won't stand here and let fear rewrite truth." She stepped back, folded her arms. Logan rose slowly from his seat. The crowd turned again. The boy stepped forward. His hands began to move. He is not dangerous. He is hurt. His fingers moved slower, more deliberate. I was afraid of him too. But he never hurt me. He paused, then signed. People did. Mabel stood, placed a hand on his back. Dana stepped beside them. 3 silhouettes, against the weight of the room. And then, a voice from the side. One of the old men from Elder Pines. He rose to his feet. No one else came to save us. Another woman stood. That horse carried me uphill when I couldn't walk. A third. He didn't need to speak to tell me I was safe. One by one they stood, voices rising not in anger, but in remembrance. And the petition, it lay forgotten on the floor, wet from someone's boot print. Logan looked up at Ghost, waiting outside the hall with Reed. The horse, wounded but alive, lifted his head toward the building. Not fearfully, but as if listening, as if waiting for permission to exist. And for the first time, he received it. Spring in Bozeman didn't come gently. It crept in like an apology, melting the last of the stubborn snow and rivulets down the mountainside, softening the sharpness winter left behind. Where once there were brittle trees and wind-scoured dirt, now there were patches of green, slow and tentative, pushing upward. And in the heart of it all, a hammer swung. Then another, and another. In the clearing just beyond the old coal ridge, a place long abandoned, where rusted cart tracks once carried darkness into the ground, a transformation had begun. It started with Mabel. The same Mabel who once folded her arms against the world, who threw silence at silence, now stood in front of a dusty county clerk with a deed in hand. She offered the family's old mining parcel, the last piece of land she'd sworn never to revisit, to something better, something healing. They would call it Whispering Hooves. It wasn't Mabel's idea. It had been Logan's, or rather his drawing. Weeks earlier, he had slipped a sheet of paper onto her lap one evening. Crude sketches of horses' wide fields, and a child in a wheelchair smiling beneath a sun drawn with too many rays. At the bottom, he had written in large, careful letters, "A place where silence heals." She hadn't needed any more convincing. Now Dana stood on the ridge, with a blueprint spread over a pickup truck's hood hair whipping in the wind. She pointed toward the slope where a ramp would lead down to the pasture. "We'll need soft gravel here, and fencing that gives nothing sharp. We're not building a barn, we're building a sanctuary." Reed worked with his shovel sleeves rolled up, clearing what had once been train tracks, buried under brush. "Used to be coal down here," he said. "Now we're digging up something a hell of a lot lighter." The town had changed since the flood. Some of it quietly, some of it loudly. A few who once signed petitions now showed up with wood, with nails, with lunch packed in Tupperware. Because when something survives fire, water, and silence, it earns its right to stay. And Ghost Rider had more than earned it. He stood now in a half-built paddock, ribs no longer visible, a fresh halter, embroidered with WH01, looped gently over his head. Logan brushed his mane with deliberate care, whispering something no one else needed to hear. They understood each other, always had. But today wasn't for Logan. Today was for someone else. The van pulled up late morning, white unmarked except for a bumper sticker, Montana Children's Health Services. Out came a woman in scrubs, then a nurse, and then a girl, 8, maybe 9, thin, too thin. Brown curls knotted beneath a wool hat, pulled too low. Her name was Clara. They hadn't told Logan that, but he felt it. Clara didn't look at anyone. She didn't speak. She kept one hand gripping the handle of her wheelchair like it might float away. Dana met her first, knelt to her eye level. "We're glad you're here." Clara didn't blink, didn't nod. Her eyes flicked once, just once, toward the large black figure in the paddock. Ghost Rider, still, silent, waiting. Logan watched from the gate. Dana spoke gently. "This is Ghost. He's not like other horses. He listens more than he talks." Clara didn't move. Ghost didn't either. "The wind picked up," the nurse said softly. "She hasn't made eye contact in almost a year. Just let her be." But Logan didn't wait. He opened the gate and stepped aside, letting Ghost walk on his own. The horse moved slowly, deliberately, no coaxing, no reins, just movement. He reached Clara's chair and stopped, head low, ears forward, waiting. She looked at his hooves, then at his chest, then back down. Nothing happened. For a long time, nothing at all. And then Ghost lowered his head further, so low his muzzle brushed the edge of the wheelchair. And then he did something no one expected. He nudged her fingers, just once, softly. Clara gasped. It was barely audible. But Logan heard it. Then her hand moved. Slight, but real. She let her fingers rest on Ghost's nose. The nurse took a breath. Dana smiled but didn't speak. Mabel, watching from the porch, put a hand to her mouth. And then, like light through a crack, Clara smiled. Not wide, not theatrical, but true. Logan stepped forward, placed a hand on his chest, then over his own heart. Ghost looked at him, and everything else fell away. That moment became legend. It was the first of many. Whispering Hooves grew one child at a time. Autistic kids who hadn't spoken in months began humming when brushing Ghost's tail. Veterans with tremors found stillness in his presence. Children who flinched from touch allowed his breath to warm their cheeks. And Logan, he became the boy who taught others how to listen with their hands, their bodies, their eyes. He spoke less than ever, but he was heard more than most. Ghost never performed, never danced, never wore a saddle again. He simply stood, and by standing, he healed. The snow had returned, not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that softens edges. Montana, in early winter, was like a ghost breathing quiet, slow tender, if you listened right. And in the wide clearing of Whispering Hooves, laughter moved like smoke through the cold. Logan stood in the field beside Ghost, his back to the rising sun. Around him, a circle of children watched. Not with tension, not with fear, with trust. Some were in wheelchairs, some with tremors in their hands, others with eyes that rarely met another's. But all of them were watching Logan. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, placed his hand on his chest, then reached out gently and pressed it to Ghost's. The children followed. Dozens of tiny hands, some steady, some shaking, mimicked the gesture. Chest to heart, heart to horse. Ghost stood calm, his breath visible in the air. And something passed between them all. Something ancient and wordless. That morning, Logan taught them what he called the loudest language he knew, hand to heart. It wasn't about horses. It wasn't even about healing. It was about connection. And it began to spread. Every week, more children came. Some sat in silence. Some hummed while brushing Ghost's mane. One boy who hadn't spoken since the night of a car crash whispered home after touching the stallion's neck. It was never flashy, never a miracle with lights, but it was real. Word began to travel. First local newspapers, then an online article, then a short video shot by a visiting therapist that went viral. The boy who healed with silence. Reporters came. Cameras clicked. They asked Logan to speak. He said nothing. They invited him to Chicago to speak at a national conference on trauma and healing. He declined. When Mabel asked why, he wrote simply, "I'm already speaking here." And she understood. One December night, snow fell heavy and quiet. Mabel sat by the fire, knitting when the phone rang. She picked it up, expecting a wrong number. It was the nurse from the assisted living home in town. Reed hadn't shown up for breakfast. They found him still in bed, peaceful, eyes closed, one hand resting on his chest, the other holding a photograph. It was the one Logan had given him of Ghost standing with Logan beneath the Whispering Hooves sign, winter's sun haloing their silhouettes. Mabel didn't cry, not right away. She thanked the nurse, hung up, and turned toward the door. Logan was already standing there, coat on, boots laced, like he'd known. She didn't ask how. She didn't have to. He looked up at her and signed. He listened when no one else did. She nodded, lips trembling. That night, Logan saddled Ghost for the first time since the flood. Not with a bridle, not with reins. Just a wool blanket and an old leather strap Reed once used to carry gear. He mounted slow. The snow crunched beneath them, and then they rode. No fanfare, no one watching. Just the boy, the horse, and the snow-drenched path around the mountain. One full circle. A loop that felt like memory, like tribute, like something finishing that had once been left undone. As they passed the ridge's peak, the moon broke through the clouds, casting light on the trail. Ghost's breath steamed in the cold. Logan reached forward, pressed his palm to the horse's neck, then to his own chest, then upward toward the stars. Goodbye, Reed. Thank you. Down below, the town slept. But up there, something eternal moved. Something that said, we remember. We carry forward. We do not forget. Days passed. Logan didn't mention Reed again. But his steps were heavier, his silences longer, until one morning Clara, the little girl from the wheelchair, rolled beside him in the paddock and whispered, "I heard the stars that night." Logan looked at her. She smiled. "Did you?" He nodded. She reached for his hand, pressed it to her chest, then to Ghost's, then her own. 3 points, one rhythm, and Logan smiled too, the kind of smile that said he was still here, that Reed was still here, that Ghost would carry it all, and that sometimes the most powerful legacy a soul can leave behind isn't a monument. It's a movement. The field was greener than it had ever been. Even in Montana's stubborn spring, where winter liked to linger longer than welcome, the land around Whispering Hooves had bloomed into something alive, awake, undeniable. Children scattered across the pasture like bright wildflowers, their coats colorful, their laughter rising like bird song. The paddocks were filled with soft neighs and gentle nuzzles. Hoofbeats moved slow and steady, grounding the earth beneath each step. Everything pulsed with purpose. It had been 1 year, exactly, since the night the flood had nearly drowned Bozeman, since Ghost had carried the forgotten to safety, since a boy with no voice had said the name that rewrote his story. And this morning Logan stood at the center of it all. He was taller now. His limbs still carried the awkward beauty of boyhood. But his presence had shifted. More still. More certain. He no longer needed people to understand him, because they did. He raised his hand, the group of children before him, mimicking his motion instantly. They stood in a circle, faces toward the wind, hand to heart, then forward toward Ghost, who stood calm and regal in the grass. Older now, grayer at the muzzle, one eye slightly fogged, but still unmistakable. Still Ghost Rider, still legend, still the heartbeat of this place. The children moved together. Some signed, some touched the grass. Others simply closed their eyes and listened to the air, to their breath, to the quiet. Dana stood near the barn, clipboard in hand, watching the class unfold. She didn't interfere. She never did. She knew what this was. It wasn't therapy. It was sacred. Mabel, wrapped in her son's old army coat, sat on the porch swing. In her lap, a book of poetry half read. But her eyes never left the field. Every morning, she said, she came to watch the world remember how to be gentle. Reed's name had been carved into the center stone of the herb garden. The kids watered it without being told. At the edge of the pasture near the willow tree, where the horses rested in the afternoon, stood a simple wooden sign, Whispering Hooves, where silence healed. Beneath it, a whiteboard was pinned between two posts, freshly wiped clean each day. Today, Logan approached it after class. He picked up a dry erase marker, turned it slowly in his hand, then wrote, "You don't need a voice to love, just a heartbeat that matches." He capped the marker and stepped back. A girl beside him read the words and blinked. She touched her chest, then the board, then turned and ran off toward the stables laughing. Logan watched her go and smiled. Behind him, Ghost stepped forward. The kids were already moving to him, brushing his coat, kissing his neck, whispering secrets to a creature they believed could carry pain away. He could. He always had. Logan placed a hand gently on the stallion's withers, just behind the scar that had never fully vanished. The sun reached its peak. Everything glowed, and then the camera pulled back. Slow at first, lifting past the stable, the paddocks, the winding trail down to the old coal ridge, now reborn as pasture. Upward past the barn, with its tin roof and solar panels, up and out until Logan and Ghost were dots in a green field surrounded by golden light. Then higher still, the world shrinking, the message remaining. You don't need a voice to love. The last frame caught Logan turning his face toward the sun, eyes closed. Ghost exhaled beside him, nostrils flaring. Then, cut to white, silence. And then, a single piano note, clear, lonely. Another, then more, building like soft footsteps. Then, a sound layered beneath the music. Faint at first, then louder, hoofbeats. Steady, measured, eternal, galloping into the distance. Not toward fear, not away from pain, but into light, into memory, into the echo of everything that had been saved.